Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this online service of Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, a loving, spirited, and evermore inclusive community. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, whomever you love, and whatever your faith tradition, you are welcome here. My name is Kinney, and I'm the assistant minister here at QUUF. I'd like to begin this service by acknowledging that the water, land, and shorelines here in Port Townsend are the traditional territory of the S'Klallam and Chimacum peoples. We honor and acknowledge our indigenous members and neighbors and vow to help restore and sustain their homelands. In a moment, we'll light the chalice, but first, let's settle our minds and calm our hearts with the ringing of our chime. It is good to be together. Let us now welcome Katy, Kristin, Doug, and Pat, who will lead our call to community, hymn number 188, Come, Come, Whoever You Are, and with the words by Rumi.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, ours is no caravan, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, ours is no caravan, lover of living, ours is no caravan of despair, ours is no caravan, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, ours is no caravan of despair, ours is no caravan, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, wanderer, caravan, lover of living, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come.
Thank you, Katy, Kristin, Doug, and Pat. It is now time to light our chalice. Please join me and today's worship assistant, Katy Franco, in our chalice lighting words. We light this flame in solidarity with those who dwell on the edges of our social structures. May they be seen by this light so that the hungry may be fed, the homeless sheltered, and that those who fade into the shadows may be centered in the light. Our opening words are by Tissa Balasarea from Toward the Liberation of Theology in Asia. Most people think that theology is something beyond their competence. They think of it as a highly sophisticated discipline or as a demanding a church appointment for doing theology or as needing a direct communication line with God. But the fact is that we all do theology in one form or another, even if it be negating the existence of God. When we reflect on the meaning of our lives and its relation to our ultimate values, its source and destiny, we are theologizing. When we consider the good and bad of an action, we are making a theological reflection. Our conscience, the inner light and voice within us, places before us such values, and in relation to the deepest insights and instructions within us. Theology relates to the act of righteous living and reflection concerning it in relation to the light we receive. I'd now like to welcome Bo Algren, our encouraging director of family ministry, who will share our time for all ages. Bo?
Good morning, everyone. Today, in our exploration of theology, I thought that this story about opening ourselves up to the unknown and being honest about what we don't know would be a good entrance into that. So this is I Wonder by Annika Harris and illustrated by John Rowe. Eva loves to look for the moon. It follows her from place to place, disappearing behind trees and mountains and then appearing again someplace new. Look, Mama, there it is. The moon looks so beautiful in the sky. How do you think it follows us, Eva? Eva thinks about it, but she can't figure it out. It's okay to say, I don't know, says her mother. When we don't know something, we get to wonder about it. I wonder if the earth and the moon are friends, says Eva. Her mother smiles. I like that idea. But, Mama, how does the moon really stay close to us? Well, there's an invisible force called gravity that pulls all the things in the universe together, Eva's mother explains. Gravity keeps the moon close to the earth, and it keeps the planets close to the sun, too. They circle around like this. Eva understands a little better, but then she starts to wonder. Mama, where does gravity come from? I don't know, Eva. Nobody really knows for sure. And when no one knows the answer to something, it's called a mystery. A mystery is something for everyone to wonder about together. How fun. Eva imagines herself wondering about gravity together with all the people in the whole world. Eva watches the moon disappear behind the clouds as she walks, excited to see where it will appear next. How many grains of sand are there in the whole wide world, Mama? I wonder about that too. There are trillions and trillions of grains of sand, but nobody knows exactly how many. Eva tries to think about all the sand in the world. It feels so big I can't fit it in my imagination. It makes me feel dizzy, like I'm falling. I know what you mean, her mother agrees, and I'm sure other people feel that way too. Eva walks down another path looking for the moon, and a little orange butterfly appears. Then she notices there are butterflies everywhere. Mama, where did all these butterflies come from? These butterflies have been flying around for a few days, but they started as little caterpillars, and those caterpillars came from eggs, and those eggs came from other butterflies. There are cycles all around us, with one thing ending and another beginning. Things are always changing. Can you think of other things that change? Says Eva. Clouds and frogs and me. Later, Eva wonders, Mama, what was here before all the butterflies and frogs and clouds, before everything? I don't know, answers her mother. It's another mystery. I like trying to imagine what was here before the beginning of everything. What do you think was here? And Eva says, smiling, I don't know. She thinks about it for a long time, and then she has an idea. I wonder if there were feelings. As she walks home, Eva sees the moon again, glowing brightly from above the roof of her house. Let's go inside and look for the moon through the window.
Thank you, Bo. We'd now like to acknowledge and welcome those of you who are visiting us this morning. You are invited to say hello in the comment section and tell us your name and where you're from. The comments section can be found below or on the right side of the video when it is out of full screen. We'd love to hear from you. We also hope you'll join us for our virtual coffee hour in our Fellowship Hall Zoom room. If you don't have that link, it will be posted in the chat section at the end of the service. And if you find this service useful or inspirational, hopefully both, please share the link with your friends and family. So welcome, everyone. We're glad you're with us today. We will now receive the offering. Today is the first Sunday of the month, which is always our Hope offering. Hope stands for Helping Our People Eat, and the money raised today will go to our local food pantries. If you'd like to donate today, you have 3 options. Text the amount you'd like to give to the number now showing at the bottom of the screen. Go to our website, quuuf.org, and click on the giving link. Or simply mail a check to QUUF. Just remember to put Hope in the memo line. We will now gratefully receive your offering as we listen to Sheila Harwood play This Old World, arranged by Larry Shackley.
Hello, I'm Lloyd Westbrook, a member of the nominating committee. The nominating committee is responsible for recruiting members to serve on the QUUF board of directors, the endowment committee, and the nominating committee itself. We are hosting a Zoom open house on Saturday, February 12th, 2 to 3:30. In the open house, you'll get a quick overview of the new governance structure and the importance of strong leadership at QUUF. We'll break into Zoom rooms later on in the meeting and learn more about each of these positions, the skills and temperaments that are needed. We will have currently serving and past members of QUUF who have served in these positions. They'll provide insight into the time commitments, the nature of the work, and the emotional and spiritual rewards and challenges. You'll learn how to put yourself or a friend forward for nomination, or how to stand for election directly. Please join us Saturday, February 12th, 2 to 3:30. Thank you very much. See the Friday bulletin for details on the Zoom connection.
Thank you, Lloyd. I hope a lot of people come to this round table. I'm happy to say that we now have the privilege of receiving 4 new members into our fellowship. They recently took our new member orientation classes and have decided to join us officially. So, on behalf of our board and our entire fellowship, I would like to welcome our new members, Chris Kiesel, Linda Jangard, Elizabeth Blake, and Steve Blake. I'd also like to express my hope that your experiences here will be inspiring and transformative, both for you and for our congregation. Our congregation, you'll recall, is not based on a common creed, but rather on a common covenant, a way of being with each other in a loving, supportive, and cooperative fashion. As such, we will do our best to be a source of strength, compassion, and growth for you, and ask that you too become a source of strength, compassion, and growth for others here. For it is in lifting each other up and working collectively that we make this a vibrant and life-changing community. Now, at this time, I'd like to invite Susan Levitt from our Newcomers Outreach team to introduce our newest members of our congregation. Susan?
Thank you, Kate. We're so happy to welcome the following lovely people into our fellowship. Chris Kiesel retired to Port Townsend from Massachusetts with her husband Ken, enchanted with the mountains, oceans, and forests. They met in college, where she was an art major and he was at MIT. He worked in ocean floor mapping, and she became a gerontologist. They enjoyed each other's company for 53 years, 11 of them here in town. Now on her own, Chris is looking forward to finding new avenues of engagement and creativity. Linda Jangard and her husband Stan moved to Port Townsend 2+ years ago. They worked with a local designer builder to construct a green-built home on Morgan Hill. She and Stan met in their early 40s and have traveled a lot, including a 1-year stay in Dunedin, New Zealand, where Linda taught at Otago University. Linda is an avid reader of literature, travel narratives, and theology. She's looking forward to connecting with the QUUF community and longs to do things face-to-face. Housing, immigration, and recycling are issues that she works on. Besides walking regularly in the area, she's trying to master pétanque and plays often at the Fort Worden courts. Some of you may know Elizabeth Blake already, as she and her husband Steve have lived in and around PT for 25 years. They recently moved to Edmonds, but their family, friends, and boat are still here in PT. You might have met them through Master Gardeners, where Elizabeth volunteered for many years, or in her art studio during one of the Northwind studio tours, or building habitat houses. PT feels like home to them, like no other place. Elizabeth is a semi-retired pediatric NP and illustrator of children's books and public health books also. The past 2 years, she's been busy giving COVID vaccines to children and adults. Steve Blake worked in the energy industry, beginning in Minneapolis and then in Europe. After retiring, Steve took up sailing. Years ago, he took a great course at the Maritime Center in PT to get a captain's license, which he has found invaluable. You can sometimes spot him sailing in the waters near PT. He and Elizabeth also enjoy their time with grandchildren, travel, and reading. And there you have it, our newest members. We are delighted to have you all join us.
Thank you, Susan. And welcome to our wonderful and interesting new members. And now, all of you, will you please join me in reading the following words that you will find at the bottom of your screen? Let us join voices. We, the congregation of the Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, gladly receive you, Chris, Linda, Elizabeth, and Steve, into our community. Let us join together in working towards a deeper understanding of one another and in upholding our covenant to love, to share, and to serve. Thank you, everyone. Now, let us extend a warm welcome to Chris, Linda, Elizabeth, and Steve whenever we see them in the chat box on Sunday mornings, in virtual coffee hours, or in in-person events at our campus. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Kate. We will now share our joys and sorrows, recognizing that our personal joys and sorrows are only a fragment of the joys and sorrows of the larger community of life. And thus, we place this first stone, thinking in particular of the first signs of the coming spring, the emerging tips of daffodil and crocus, snowbells and iris, and the setting buds on our forsythia and rhododendrons. Let us join in the chorus of future rebirth and possibility. And now within our congregation, we begin with an update on Carl Allen. As some of you may know, Carl had a very sudden loss of all function of his lower legs. It took a few days to figure out what was causing it, but once his awesome orthopedic team at Virginia Mason figured it out, they performed emergency back surgery to remove the calcium deposits that were pressing on Carl's spinal column. The surgery took place on January 28th, and he returned home this past Monday. He expects to regain his muscle strength and most of the nerve control in his legs, but acknowledges it will take a while. Carl and his wife Barbara report feeling very grateful and very supported. And although Carl cannot see visitors at this time, let's wait a couple of weeks. He would welcome cards. Carl's on pain medication and needs a lot of rest, so phone calls should be kept to a minimum at this time. We light this next candle for member Chris Copeland, who underwent a rather complicated aortic valve replacement surgery on February 2nd. She is expected to stay in the hospital for another few days before coming home. If you'd like to keep up with her and bring her a meal, there is a Caring Bridge page set up for her. Just go to caringbridge.org and search for Chris Copeland. And we light this next candle for one of our former OWL instructors, Tanya Brakeman, who recently underwent a radical hysterectomy and appendectomy due to widespread precancerous growth. There's the Caring Bridge set up for her as well. Again, just go to caringbridge.org and search for Tanya Brakeman. We have a few birthdays to celebrate this week. This first candle is for Barbara Morey, whose birthday was on January 26th. Happy birthday, Barb. This next candle is for 4 QUUFers with the same birth date, which was yesterday. There's Nancy Mann and Dick Williams, and for Shauna Talamonte. And last but not least, Lida Wachel. Happy birthday, Nancy, Dick, Shauna, and Lida. We hope you had a great birthday. And now we place the final stone, holding in our hearts the joys and sorrows I've just shared, but also thinking of such joys and sorrows among us that are unexpressed, but of no less importance. I invite you now into a moment of silence.
Ernesto Cardenal is a poet of liberation. He states, "I have expressed one reality, which is political, economic, social, religious, and mystical, all at the same time." This is Vision from the Blue Plain by Ernesto Cardenal. In the round little window, everything is blue. Land, bluish, blue-green, blue, and sky. Everything is blue. Blue lakes and lagoons, blue volcanoes. While farther off, the land looks bluer, blue islands in a blue lake. This is the face of the land liberated, and where all the people fought, I think, for love. To live without the hatred of exploitation. To love one another in a beautiful land, so beautiful, not only in itself, but because of the people in it. Above all, because of the people in it. That's why God gave us this beautiful land, for the society in it. And in all those blue places, they fought, suffered for a society of love here in this land. One patch of blue looks more intense, and I thought I was seeing the sites of all the battles there and of all the deaths behind that small, round window pane. Blue, all the shades of blue. Our special music today is Leonard Cohen's Come Healing, sung by members of the First UU Society in Brooklyn.
The splinters that you carry, the cross you left behind, come healing of the body, come healing of the mind, and let the heavens hear it, the penitential hymn, come healing of the spirit. Healing of the limb. Behold the gates of mercy in arbitrary space, and none of us deserving the cruelty or the grace. Oh, solitude of longing, where love has been confined, come healing of the body, come healing of the mind. Oh, see the darkness yielding, that tore the light apart, come healing of the reason, come healing of the heart. Oh, troubled dust concealing and undivided love, the heart beneath is teaching to the broken heart above. Let the heavens falter and let the earth proclaim, come healing of the altar. Come healing of the name. Oh, longing of the branches to live
Theology. For some of us, the word theology may be intriguing, and for others, something to run from. Theo, God, and L-O-G-Y, study, is a pretty funny phrase when it comes right down to it. It certainly is not provable, open to a million interpretations, and it seems a bit of a cloud in the sky concept. What is God made from? Love, misconceptions, myth, yearning, desire? There is not one theology, but more than can be counted. Probably you and I all carry different theological frames. Even if we understand ourselves to be atheists, agnostics, or humanists, we have created a frame on which to hang the theology word. Kate, Laura, and I are going to spend 2 weeks looking at one form of theology called liberation theology. This week, I will do a brief overview of what it means and how it came to be. Next week, Kate will look at how it has been understood and acted on by Unitarian Universalists. So here goes. The frame in which I grew up had a codified book of answers to theological questions. I memorized the answers as I walked to school to be quizzed each day. That process did not serve me well. Most of us, as we mature, change our theological questions and answers to fit where our feet are placed that day. Instead of memorization, it is theology in the doing, in the rough, and it is often created with friends, cooking, building a home, birthing a child, planting a garden, or deciding who gets our vote. Our theologies are built on our lived experience, our feet on the ground lives, and that life will be different with regard to our gender, our economic status, our sexuality, the country where we reside. Even in creedal churches, there are wildly different ideas on what the creedal statements actually mean. The theological language and ideas take their frame from culture, racial, and gender groupings, and social status. That is very different than from theologies that are decided in the clouds above, usually by males, and disseminated to the folks below. An example from my growing up. If you wanted to study theology, you had to be male, go to an all-male seminary, spend a year studying philosophy, and then you were finally allowed to study theology. The curriculum was centered around topics and books that were used throughout the Western world. It was framed around Platonic and Neoplatonic categories. This stressed the existence of a higher world and a transcendence of an absolute from which everything came and to which everything returned. In other words, the existence of our here and now, feet on the ground world was not valued very much. And by the 12th century, rational knowledge was added, not experiential knowledge, but the life of the mind. If one was raised in the West, religion was studied by men, run by men, and often had a male deity. So this created a certain way of looking, being, understanding, and exercising power. If the sacred is male identified and is conceived to be the most powerful essence in the universe, it leaves a good deal out, and for some of us, a good deal to be desired. Liberation theology is a different way of helping frame our reality. It was formed in the politically and socially divided South America of the 1960s. And South America was a place where, for centuries, religion had been used to subjugate, massacre, enslave, and colonize the indigenous population. The whole continent was suffering from the crude marriage of king and pulpit. They had landed in this dubious relationship because of a desire for monetary profit. The stunning results can be seen in the Cathedral of Seville, where the remains of Christopher Columbus are ensconced in gold from the Americas, gold purchased with the blood of indigenous slaves. This pattern existed for centuries, and then people began to rise up. Young men from all over Latin America were sent to Europe to study theology in the 1960s. They came back to their countries radicalized. One of these men was a Peruvian, Gustavo Gutierrez. And the more he studied in Europe, the more he realized that the words of time-honored Christian theologians simply did not work for the peasants, the poor from his country. He wrote the book, A Theology of Revolution. The poet Ernesto Cardenal wrote Gospel in Solena Tinama, a book of conversations about peasants, about how to interpret scripture readings for their own time and place. These books and others like them have reshaped who does theology, where it's done, and how it transforms the social structure. So how do we place our feet on this ground, this earth? With liberation theology, social science finally has its day. Biology, psychology, sociology, indigenous knowledge, and spirituality all become part of one way of seeing and understanding our world. And it also creates the means to reshape it. This theological frame responds to the horrific inequality that class divisions and militaristic regimes have bestowed on poor people of this earth. What are some of the basic tenets of liberation theology? The theology emerges from the lives of the poor, the disenfranchised, the throwaways of the universe. These are the people who tell their stories and who help retell the sacred text from their own vision. The theology is not a yes to a belief system, but rather a stance towards life and a life in community. Individualism without a community base would be fruitless. It is fluid. People can come in and out of what are called base communities. Thousands of these were formed throughout Latin America. These are places where sacred texts are read and responded to in a communal setting. There's no expert to tell you what is to believe or what to do. Yet there is a system of sacred values that are honored and acknowledged. Communal reflection is essential. Action or praxis is crucial. The base community that does not respond in action is not living within the spiritual frame. If the community studies and formulates truth but does nothing to better the world, then why exist? The crucial aspect of doing this feet-on-the-ground theology is that the group is responsible for transforming the world as it is unveiled. These communities begin the work of liberation, which can put them in conflict with wealthy nations that need their labor to ensure their first world lifestyles. I met and also lived in community with women who worked in some of these base groups in El Salvador. They felt called to teach poor people to read and have a fuller life and livelihood. Of course you can do theology without reading, but reading gives you an extra push. The sacred texts are open for your eyes, not just the eyes of a trained theologian. It gives you power to learn about ideas outside your local area. But doing this type of reflection can cause enemies because it upsets the status quo. The result was that 4 women-based group leaders were murdered by US-backed Salvadorian National Guards. In some strange way, this gave strength to many different forms of liberation theology sprouting around the world. These theologies are not clones of the Central and South American experience. They come out of the feet-on-the-ground notion that theology is for everyone, especially the poor and disenfranchised. All the bottom-up ways of doing theology are contextual and reflect the concerns and needs of a particular community. What are some forms of theology that have emerged? Well, Black theology in North America was developed right alongside liberation theology in South America. A major proponent was James Cone. The centerpiece of his thought was that there is no place in Black theology for a colorless God in a society where human beings suffer precisely because of their color. There is nothing resembling an otherworldly orientation. He saw theology not as an abstract process, but as the concrete reality of African American life. Gradually, Black theology moved from one topic, race, to seeing that healthy life options are on the earth for all living beings. But there are Black minds and Black hearts who read the signs and create the alternatives. There are many other forms of doing liberative theology: Asian, Native, Latinx, feminist, queer, African. The models are different, but the heart is the same: seeking the sacred in communities that are on the edge. One of my favorite liberative theologians is George Tinker, who wrote American Indian Liberation, A Theology of Sovereignty. He states that Indian politics and spirituality are wholly intertwined. He challenges American religion on many levels. As he calls it, American indigenous cultures are communitarian by nature and therefore do not share the Euro-West capitulation to the priority of the individual over and against community. Therefore, if some in the Indian community are Christian, they must determine in dialogue the meaning of the gospel. Common confession of faith meant that American Indian communities were being co-opted into a cultural frame, an assimilation to the language and social structure of the colonizer. For example, the word Lord has no meaning in Native communities because a chief has limited authority. It is putting a hierarchical structure on an egalitarian community. This is destructive. In prayer, Native peoples do not bow heads, kneel, or fold hands. And if Native communities are forced to decide between traditional life of community or the cultural conquest of the missionaries, the culture suffers. Did you know that here in the Pacific Northwest and in Canada, religious denominations slice the geography into which denomination would set up house in each area? American Indian liberation work is for the indigenous communities in the United States, but it is important work that all of us should support and learn from. I would like to share one experience of liberation theology that I learned from others. I went to a seminary that had mostly African American students, some Latinx and some Korean, and very few of us were white. I read that there was a weekend workshop on womanist theology. It was presumptive of me to sign up because womanist theology is for Black women who have not been given much voice in the Black theology movement or in the feminist movement. For example, white women were fighting to gain access to the public sphere, but many Black women did not have that choice. They had to work, often in dead-end jobs. The jobs were limited, but Black women fought for family needs, for education, housing, and health care. The womanist idea came from Alice Walker. It alluded to finding wisdom within the circle of Black spirited women. When I got to the workshop, I certainly found out about the spirited part. There were perhaps 50 of us. All were African American women, except for a few of us. A scripture text from Luke was read aloud. It was the story of Jesus, Mary, and Martha. Jesus comes to visit their home. Mary sits at Jesus' feet and is listening to him, and Martha gets ticked off and asks Jesus to have Mary help her. And here is the line from Jesus. "Oh, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." The professor selected 3 of us to play the roles and act out what we were feeling. I was thrown into the fray and was asked to play Mary. There I was, looking up at Jesus, and Martha challenged me. All the women in the room began saying how privileged I was, probably never worked a day in my life, on, and I gave a punch back, saying, well, my women relatives were cooks for the Rockefellers, and my male relatives were bus drivers. Nothing romantic there. And then came the slam dunk. You see, my family had a home, food, parochial education, the basics. Martha asked Jesus to decide between us, and I gave Jesus the evil eye, and he picked me. Then the whole room went into chaos, and Jesus was asked to leave. So he did. He went away. When he left, we spent a long time talking sister to sisters, and we plotted revenge. We asked Jesus to come back in and commanded him to work on preparing our supper. Reworking the old stories in new ways can help us no matter what the spiritual tradition. And of course, a community of solidarity was born for women who were working hard at jobs during the day and going to seminary at night. It bonded us for the hard work we were doing, yes, and the holy men better help. Liberation theology can be done in any community. It's how we look at old traditions, reshape them, and make sure that the people on the edge become the people in the center. At one time, I shared pastoring at a small parish in the Rainier Valley. It was a mixed-race parish with majority white and some black families and immigrants from the South Sudan. I taught during the day because the parish could not afford a real salary, and nights and weekends, this community played and worked hard. We did community reflection together, and out of this grew many things. Sharing the church with a local black church, hosting Tent City for the homeless, sharing meals every Sunday since many were poorly nourished, housing an immigration center, sharing our place for tutoring children, and many of these kids were kids of color, running a summer interracial program, and the sermons were often dialogue. But the heart of the community was turning out our lower level into a home for the homeless. Perhaps 30 people lived in our church. They did their own monitoring and often shared reflection. They joined our study groups if they so desired, were elected to our board, and the various groups became family, and some even became coupled partners. There was no creedal affirmation, but a simple desire to create a better world in a wee part of Seattle. This was a base community. We were called to be more than we were. Liberation theology shifts for every situation. When neoliberalism and globalism grew in South America and small groups died out, the feet on the ground theology grew in other places. It's movable. It could even move to Port Townsend. And here is a thought from writer Miguel de la Torres. Liberation theology is not just another theological perspective struggling with ethereal concepts concerning the final destination of the soul and of humankind, or a study of the church. Liberation theology is a critique of Western political, economic, and social structures from the perspective of the disenfranchised. Oppression is a theological problem that requires the faithful not just to contemplate through practice or action to bring about justice. This challenge is not because you expect or hope to win, but because your faith calls you, pleads with you to act. I look forward to part 2 of this topic given by Kate Lohr next Sunday as she examines how Unitarian Universalists and liberation theology join together for action. Go for it, Kate. Our closing song today will be hymn number 348, Guide My Feet, sung by our own vaccinated voices, directed by Pat Rodgers.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain.
It's almost time to extinguish our chalice. But first, let me remind you that Kate Lohr will be leading our service next week. Her sermon title is Woven in a Single Garment of Destiny. And it is a follow-up to today's sermon with a focus on liberation theology in a UU context. I hope you can join us. Now, please join me and Katy in our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish our flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. After the service, I hope you'll join us for our virtual coffee hour. What you can expect is to be placed in a Zoom room with one of our coffee hour hosts who will facilitate personal check-ins, as well as reflection questions on the sermon topic. We hope to see you there. But first, let us turn our attention to the postlude. It is a song called Sounds of the Sidewalk, composed and performed by the Voices of Our City, a choir made up of and for San Diego's homeless.
Rolling on the pavement with a 1-2 beat, smooth as
restless arms reaching, our battles going down, with chaos all around. And the mother reassures herself everything will be alright as she steps in rhythm to the sounds of the sidewalk.
Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk. Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk. And I've got the music in my soul.